Friends, welcome to today's Vocations and Public Ministry lunch and our conversation with our special guest, TiShaunda McPherson. TiShaunda, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to those gathered here around the table, and welcome to those of you who are connecting online. My name is Dr. Tim Eberhardt, and I have the privilege of directing our MA in Public Ministry degree. So TiShaunda, a little background on our conversation. 3 years ago this fall, when we launched this new degree, Master of Arts in Public Ministry, we were responding to a growing number of students, both current students and prospective students, who were sharing with us something along the lines of, we feel called to ministry. I feel called to ministry. I'm clear about that, but not necessarily to traditional forms of ordained ministry in a traditional congregational setting. I feel called to civic engagement. I feel called to nonprofit management. I am passionate about realizing racial justice within institutions, within the public sphere, and I want to be theologically trained in a seminary to do it. But you've got these traditional tracks. Where do I fit in? And so the MA in Public Ministry degree is an attempt to respond to the callings of the Spirit in lives like your own, who followed this path of seminary theological education and find yourself doing work that is aligned with your deepest commitments, but not necessarily in a traditional pastoral ministerial role, right? Now, not long after launching the degree, precisely because there are so many different avenues that a student might take with this program, we realized just how important it was to be able to connect students with practitioners, those who are living out a call to ministry in journalism, as executive director of a nonprofit, as an artist. We've had a whole range of conversation partners, and in doing so, we're curious about vocational discernment. We're curious about what led persons like yourself into the positions that you find yourselves in, what you've learned along the way, what advice you give. So it's kind of an informal conversation about vocation, practice, career development, all of it. I'm so thrilled that you're with us. By way of introduction, TiShaunda McPherson serves as Northwestern University's Senior Associate Vice President for Equity, where she oversees the university's Office of Equity. She brings to this work over 20 years of experience as a civil rights professional addressing systemic discrimination in both higher education and workplace environments. And she's done so as a researcher, as an attorney, as a compliance professional, and an equity officer. And she happens to be a graduate of Garrett-Evangelical Theological Seminary. Give it up. Now, I'm not going to offer any more by way of introduction because we want this to be informal, and we really want to invite you to share a bit about what you do and how it is that you came to it. So I'm going to stop with that. Let me offer a word of prayer, and then we'll talk.
Sounds good.
Let us pray. For the goodness of this day, for the fruits of the earth, for the creativity of the Holy Spirit in calling us to a variety of ministries and a variety of services, equipping us with so many diverse gifts, all for the common good. For all of this, we give thanks. May we hear your promptings to seek justice. May we follow in your ways of compassionate mercy, that goodness might break forth like the dawn and healing spring up quickly. May it be so. Amen. So, TiShaunda, what does a senior associate vice president for equity at a major university do?
I do all of the things.
I believe it.
So my primary responsibility is overseeing the Office of Equity. And the Office of Equity is charged with a few different things. One, responding to reports of discrimination and harassment that would be filed by students, faculty, or staff, or even members who are not part of our community, but who may have been harmed by a member of our community. We also have an education and outreach arm. And so that team does a lot of programming around inclusivity and understanding unconscious bias. This fall, we're launching an anti-racism intensive training program for our senior leaders and that next level of leaders, which will eventually trickle down to all of our faculty and staff. We're also building out customized digital modules for everyone in our community to take around anti-racism and the intersection of various marginalized identities and how we fill the space, but also how we can create an environment of welcome. Then we are also launching a restorative justice program this fall, which I am incredibly excited about. And so that is new, but we have trained 40 individuals across the university to partner with us in this work because it is really about community. And so making sure that we're all aware of our spheres of influence and using our gifts and talents to build community and truly an inclusive environment. The third, I think that's the fourth piece of our work is around sort of compliance. And we oversee the university's affirmative action plans to make sure that we are compliant with federal guidelines and maintaining the data so that other schools and departments around the university have access to the information that they need to make better decisions around inclusivity. And then the last piece, sort of still in that compliance bucket, is that we facilitate accommodation requests for faculty and staff. So we do a lot.
Yes, you do.
We are I say small-ish because of the scope of our work, but we've got 12 fantastic team members who are really dedicated to this work, and it's challenging, but it's meaningful work every day. Yeah.
So, in addition to the initiatives, programs, the oversight, it sounds like you're also involved in management or oversight, working with different staff members. Tell me a bit about that aspect of your work.
Yeah, so as the senior AVP, I oversee the entire office and its operations. And so I have 3 senior directors and a program coordinator that report directly to me. And then the rest of the staff report up to those individuals. And so, I see, my work in managing a team as actually being part of ministry as well. And it's exciting work to me too, in addition to kind of the underlying work that we do, because it's given me an opportunity to get to know each of the members of my whole team and to help cultivate their skills and talents so that they can have the career that they want, but also to expose them to different aspects of what ministry might look like. And so, we have, a variety, diversity of religious beliefs in the office. We've had conversations about how one's faith shows up in the work. And I never thought that I would actually have a job, like an actual job. And this is, my career where I would feel comfortable doing that. where I can show up as my whole self, and not feel like I need to lessen or hide parts of myself because of the particular workplace environment that I'm in. And so managing is, I would say, probably 40% of sort of my daily routine, and really just building up the team to have exposure to different types of work.
So I'm incredibly curious to come back to some of the focus of your work in equity at an institution, your role in terms of management and oversight. But you've already begun to speak about this work as a form of ministry. Say more about that.
Yeah.
How does a role like this, how have you come to embrace it as a form of ministry?
You know, I think I would have to take a step back and sort of tell a little bit of my story. And so I share with, my family and friends, and more or less they've shared with me that this is kind of the culmination of all of the work that I've done over the course of my life and career, and that this position was perfectly suited for me. And when I look at it, I believe that. And so a little bit, about my background is that, I've always been someone who loves people. I love to be with people. I love to help people. And I've always been drawn to youth and young adults. And, so I've always been the one, in the family where if we have a family gathering, I'm around kids, I'm, engaging with them. I've mentored, countless, teens and young adults. And I love that. And so when I went into college, I wanted to find, a career path where I felt like I could really make a difference. So I majored in psychology, and my mom was furious.
What are you going to do with that?
Right, exactly. What are you doing with a psychology degree? And in my mind, I didn't know the sort of the, wide opportunities that existed in the world for someone who had, a deep-rooted faith, but also wanted to help people. And so to me, it was, well, I'm going to be a psychologist, because then I get to work with kids and youth and young adults, and for those who are troubled or who have, concerns and need more support and folks to wrap around them and to encourage them. And I got into college. I, maintained, my psychology degree, but I felt like, well, that's not quite it. So then I went and did a master in public policy, because I said, well, I love the idea of focusing on an individual, but there are these broad scale sort of systemic problems that I want to affect too, right? And so I did my, master in public policy, wrote about the education system and my thesis. And I'm like, okay, this is closer, but that's not quite it. So then I went to law school, and I said, okay, I can, and you all laughing, this is exactly the response my mom gave me. And she's like, you are the perpetual forever student, and when are you going to get a real job?
I'm laughing because of how impressive it is. Keep going.
Yeah. So, so in law school, that was where I was able to cultivate the advocacy part of me. And so I felt like that brought, those sort of three areas together. And I felt like, okay, this is it. And, I practiced law, and I did a lot of pro bono work, and felt, fairly good about the work that I was doing. But, true to our Lord and Savior, there's a time where you feel like, all right, I thought this was it, but I feel that little tug, that nudge. And I was very involved in my church, and one of the youth ministry leaders was involved in just every aspect of youth and young adult ministry at our church. And someone said, well, you love school, so why don't you go to seminary? And I was like, oh, no, I'm not, that's not really my thing, but I love learning. And I wanted to, be theologically sound. I was teaching Sunday school, and I wanted to make sure that I had, a firm grounding. And at the time, I was at a church that didn't believe in women ministers. And so I wrestled with that. And the way that I, sort of ended up coming to Garrett was because there was a Master of Christian Education program.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, that sits well with me, even though I didn't have the same beliefs as my church, but I felt that was comfortable. And so getting that degree to me would have brought everything together. So I would be able to teach, I would be able to use my advocacy and my law degree, I would be able to, use my policy degree to affect sort of broad scale change. And then the psychology degree would be more sort of that interpersonal, mentoring or unofficial, kind of hand holding to carry someone through a journey. But of course, that wasn't where God wanted me to be. And I laugh now because I think I'm sort of hard-headed. And so, God had to get me in the door for me to be able to see that there was something more. And so I did switch to the MDiv program, and that really did round out sort of my whole being. And it brought together all of the things that are deeply important to me. So my faith, my community, social justice, advocacy, psychology, but from sort of a mental health perspective, and then just professionalism too, and bringing all of that into my everyday life and everything that I do. And so that's how I've become sort of who I am as a professional. And those things have led me down this particular career path that I have.
I mean, I love that, and we've heard it through many of our conversation partners of this kind of evolving, experimental venturing, not quite knowing where it might lead. So I hear the hard-headed, but I also hear the courage and the willingness to do the next thing that was calling to you.
Yeah.
Right. And so with each step, there were people in your life, there were probably internal uncertainties, restlessness that you were managing, you were dealing with, right? At those points of decision and thinking about vocation, what's your process of discernment?
Yeah.
How did you, along the way, not knowing where this is going to head into this like perfect position where all of it's synthesized, you didn't know that. You just knew that. How do you discern? How do you listen to the promptings of the Spirit? How do you know how to do the next thing?
Yeah. So, I think as I have grown in faith, I'm at a point where I can really just sit and be quiet with God. But as I was, sort of beginning this journey, that was hard for me. And so I'm grateful for a community of sort of advisors who I respect and I trust. And so those included some faculty members here, my pastor at my new church, and my grandmother. And so, and it's interesting because my grandmother, well, two of my grandmothers, one of my grandmothers before she passed away told me that you're going to be the one to make it. And I didn't know what she meant. But as I reflected back on the conversations that she and I had over, her lifetime, it wasn't that I was going to be the one to make it necessarily, as opposed to anyone else in the family, but I was going to make a life that I could be proud of and that I would not be stuck in certain sort of positions that, other members of our family, grew into and couldn't sort of break out of those molds. And then my other grandmother, who I adore, was raised, in a similar faith where she didn't believe that women should be ministers. But the fact that I was able to have conversations with her and sort of digest what I felt God was calling me to, and then had to take a step back and say, okay, God, I've heard what other people have said. What is it that you want me to do? And getting to a point of just complete vulnerability, because I knew I didn't know. I didn't know if I stayed in my current career, I didn't know where that would lead. I didn't know if I took this leap of faith, where that would lead. And so I was at this crossroads, and I felt like both are unknown. So it makes sense for me to follow God instead of going to the unknown, where I know God would always be with me, but let me trust God truly in this time. And so that was sort of the beginning of living out my faith by taking that first step. And that was just to come to seminary. And I had conversations with the pastor of my old church. And despite his belief that women should be ministers, he supported me going into seminary, and then later supported me being ordained. And now, after I have, had, more time where I have been very intentional about growing and walking on this journey with God and trying to continue to become who God has created me to be unapologetically, it's been easier for me to be able to discern God's voice amidst, all the chaos that's around me. And a lot of that is really just going into, I would say, my prayer closet, but I created an office in my house. It's in the basement. It's in the corner. It's I made it pretty for me, and it's comfortable, and that is my space. And that is often where I hear God. And it could be in the midst of me working, when I'm working from home or sitting in a chair that's in the office. But it's like that is the place where I often find and hear from God. And knowing that when I feel like something is tugging at me, or if there's something that I am questioning, that's the space that I go to. So that's sort of the evolution of my discernment process. But now I think I'm at a place where I know where to go to really hear.
So I hear at least four, and I may have missed some here, but I'm hearing consulting with, listening to those who know and love you deeply, your grandmothers, consulting with, listening to spiritual advisors, pastors, others in your life who bring that spiritual discernment to bear. I hear you paying attention to yourself, feeling restless. I'm feeling a sense of, and then I'm hearing the creation of space and time to practice the presence of God.
Yes.
As some of our spiritual traditions
Yep.
invite us to do, is to listen in solitude and quiet.
Yeah.
For others, there are different practices.
Yep.
They're different, but for you, I'm hearing at least those four.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I tried a variety of spiritual practices once I learned, more in seminary. And being out in nature and walking, listening to music, or meditating. And those have their time and place for me. And so I sort of know when that makes sense. But by and large, you nailed it. Those four are really what helped me to discern sort of the next step, or if there's a decision, or really just hearing from God in a particular moment.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask maybe another question or two, but would love soon to open it up to those around the table, those joining us online, to be able to ask questions as well. So maybe coming back to the focus of your work as a form of public ministry, would love to hear more about working within a major institution, working in an executive role, a managerial role, an oversight role, but particularly focused on the work of equity, achieving equity, examining an institution, auditing an institution, receiving complaints, processing, responding to, creating education, awareness, transformation.
Yeah.
Tell me more about how you draw on your ministerial training, your spiritual sensibilities in going about that work.
Yeah. Those are great questions. So I would say a couple things. One, I think at this point in my life, I have embraced truly who God called me to be. And being able to use each setting that I'm in to make some sort of an impact. And so I look at this work and I'm really, guided. Jesus was a disruptor. And so, I'm sure the other executives at Northwestern wouldn't be, pleased with me saying that, but I find myself in that seat. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be loud and adversarial all the time, but I recognize that I'm privileged to have a seat at the table, and I will use every opportunity I can to advance the mission of social justice. And I think at this point in my career, I'm no longer comfortable being silent in the face of injustice.
Amen.
And I think there have been times where, as I was growing into adulthood, growing in faith, growing as a professional, where I didn't know how those things aligned with each other. And now I see they're all interconnected. I can both be a professional and a disruptor. I can be a woman of faith and a professional. And so the blending of all of these things that are deeply important to me are the very essence of public ministry to me. So I take all of the sort of various hats or identities that I hold into every space. And I'm guided by, the prophets, I'm guided by Jesus, I'm guided by, all of our scriptural texts that challenge us to speak up for the least of these and to reach out to those who are on the margins and those who have been ostracized and who don't have a voice. And, it could be, in a senior leadership team meeting where we're talking about something that, I'll give you an example. We're talking, we're in the midst of COVID and we're talking about return to campus and return to sort of, whatever this new normal would be. And not to say that, the other senior leaders aren't aware of the impact, sort of the disparate impact that COVID has had on certain populations, but it's I feel my responsibility to make sure that's central in the conversation and it doesn't get lost. And so that's how I use, my privilege to be at these tables and the opportunity, because I know that I've been placed in this role at this time for a particular reason. And it could be, it could be, like I mentioned before we started the talk today, advancing this anti-racism program for an institution like Northwestern to back this. And it's, a huge initiative. And I am deeply proud and humbled that I, had the opportunity to work and lead a small team to bring this to Northwestern. And to be a leader in this space among other institutions of higher education. And so I'm not quiet anymore. And I use every, time I have to raise my voice to make sure it's not just about me, but it's about the collective. And it makes me proud. I go home and my sons, I listen to them talking to their friends and my mom's a president of a university. I'm like, well, that's not quite true, and they're like, well, I tell them because you help people, Mom. And I do. And I mean, there's so many different facets of this work that they're heart-wrenching, and there's a burden, but it's a burden that I'm willing to carry because I have been so blessed. So even for those who have been impacted by harm in some way, whether it's discrimination or sexual misconduct or any of those things, I have a team who walks through the process with folks. But there are times where students will call me and I will absolutely make myself available to them. It's not about title. It's not about why I don't do the investigations. I look at this role again as a privilege, and whatever I can do to make the Northwestern community and beyond more welcoming, more inclusive, and so that we build leaders who will go out into the world to do the same thing. That is what ministry is, and that is what this role needs to be.
Powerful. And I love the embrace and the claiming of work within an institution, of leadership, of administration, of a kind of pastoral care with students and colleagues and staff, a prophetic challenge to senior administration and systems and structures. I think so many models of social change are focused, times rightly, upon the street protest, the direct action, the community organizing, which are all essential. But seeing this work of stewarding a major set of initiatives within a major institution as a form of bringing about social change, arguably has as much potential to bring about these deep systemic transformations as the individual or the local. Not to put them in competition, but to see this as equally important of a form of social change. Not just livelihood, not just career, but social, bringing about social change.
No, I agree with that 100%. And I think, as I have, grown, I look at, the things that I named before, the psychology degree and working with people individually, and then the public policy degree and trying to disrupt or dismantle the systems of oppression, and then my law degree to advocate. But, and not actually, but all of those things are critically important for social change. And, there are some who focus on a particular area, and there are some, who are able to address it from many different vantage points. And I feel lucky to be in a role where I'm able to touch sort of each one of those things.
Yeah. So I want to make sure we get back, if it doesn't come out in the questions, I'll come back to the particular work of anti-racism, the particular work of challenging and dismantling systems of whiteness within a major institution like a world famous university, and a seminary, a more humble institution, but still a significant institution. I come back to that work, and it may come up, but let me invite other conversation partners here. Are there any questions, those gathered here or that may be coming in through our online chat?
I have a question.
Yeah.
What do you see as the biggest challenge facing equity on this campus or Northwestern's campus right now?
Yeah. So the question, So the question is, what do I see as the biggest challenge on Northwestern's campus in terms of equity? I think we have a lot actually, so it's hard to sort of focus on one. But I think one of the things that I'm seeing more and more being in this role is that there are a lot of people who want to do the right thing, but are afraid for a variety of reasons, and challenging them to get outside of their comfort zone. I think that is probably one of the hardest things that I do on a regular basis. And I think some of it is because for so long, folks have felt like, well, I'm inclusive, I don't discriminate against people. You know, the favorite one, I'm colorblind, and then I have to challenge that. But working with good people to help them become more than an ally, but really part of this work to bring social justice.
Yeah.
That is probably one of the hardest things that I have to do, because folks are very sensitive and feelings get hurt very easily. And to help them, and oftentimes it's my white colleagues who
we're talking about well-intentioned white folks
yeah,
here.
who, you know, want to do more or do something or feel like they're part of change, but don't always recognize, you know, their positions of privilege, don't always recognize the ways that they actually create harm, and how they can be an advocate. And so, you know, in a lot of conversations, you know, because of the nature of my role, this is what I do. So I'm comfortable being the one to advocate or to raise a concern. But there are some moments where I don't want to. I don't want to be that voice. And it could be something that I've been deeply, you know, affected by, and I'm still processing. And so helping, you know, some of my colleagues recognize those times where they can lift their voice to be an advocate is hard. Yeah, it's challenging.
Not always, and granted, it's woven into your job description. This is part of your work, and it's woven into your person. It's woven into your life. It's woven into your community. So to always have to be the one to point it out, to raise it, to make someone feel uncomfortable, to make someone feel like, wait, why are you coming after me? I'm on your side, right? You know, of course, you know, I've got Black friends, or I'm, you know, I've got a diverse, you know, neighborhood or whatnot. And so, you know, in this work, there's work for we white folk to do in the education, the awareness, the continual management of our feelings, of our responsibilities, of how we're engaging this. I find both in terms of the obliviousness, the defensiveness, and at times in the hyper overreactiveness that we white folk are problems. And we can laugh at us and we can cry at us and get frustrated with us. Not to invite you to figure out how to fix we white folk, but you know, what are you finding effective in, if you've identified this is a place where deep systemic change could happen more rapidly, if there was more than allies, there was kind of fighters alongside this work of dismantlement and rebuilding, right? What do you see as working?
So for Northwestern, what has been working is both a top-down and a bottom-up approach.
Okay.
It can't be one or the other, but I have been energized by the demands and the protests and the advocacy of our students.
Yeah.
And so hearing their voices and understanding their very legitimate concerns, and focusing on that rather than their method of communication, is how I bring that information to the senior leaders, and helping them to then understand what the concerns are, and in some ways trying to give them sort of real life examples or situations that they might have been a part of, to bring them into the conversation. And so it's, what I've seen and heard from the community is that there are a lot of folks across campus who are doing this work. But many are, sort of disillusioned about whether there's, real change is going to happen because there hasn't been specific attention from the leadership, and more than just in a statement.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And so that's how I've actually brought the leaders into the conversation, because many of them are like, well, the students asked for this and we gave it to them, or the community wanted this and we did that. It's not about, performing a specific task or having something on a checklist, but being in conversation and really understanding what it's like to be a Black person on Northwestern's campus, what it's like to be a member of the LGBTQ community on Northwestern's campus, thinking about, Northwestern's history, where we're positioned. We're in the North Shore, we're on the lake, we have a very deep history of Indigenous people that we don't talk about, and so in order for us to bring folks together, we have to do that work from the top down, and also challenge, our students and our faculty and staff too, to continue to do their work too, as they're asking for things. And, hopefully we sort of meet somewhere in the middle. But I think that is what is effective. I think, time has passed for having one approach, for this. And I think that's the other thing that sometimes gets us distracted, is that, you have many different voices, many different methods for creating social change. And oftentimes the way that sort of those who are in positions of power or privilege ensure that change doesn't happen is to put us against each other, rather than seeing us as trying to chip away at the same problem, but coming at it from different perspectives. And so I think that is really what has been most effective at Northwestern. And even before I came to Northwestern, and my prior organization, seeing that same thing starting to take effect, and making sure that there are a variety of voices that were contributing to the conversation.
A lot there. Other questions?
I have a question. How would you translate the work that you're doing at Northwestern to the church at large? Or if you find yourself at a place that doesn't feel that women should be ordained, or non-inclusive spaces for LGBTQ, and yet you could be doing something outside of the church, but how would you translate that to finding innovative ways to dismantle that within religious organizations as well?
Yeah.
And even as in here, as we're trying to do that with the work of being anti-racist and DEI as well.
Yeah, great question. So the question was sort of broadly, how do I translate the work that I'm doing now into work that I would do within the church, or sort of, a faith community as a whole, and where there may be some exclusive practices within the church. I think for me, the first way that I started to address that was when I fully received and embraced my call. I knew I wouldn't be able to stay at the church that I was at. And that was tough. My husband and I, had a lot of conversations. He was incredibly supportive. We had our first son and, had scheduled his blessing. And so we were deciding, are we staying here, or are we going somewhere else that would embrace me as a full person, and somewhere where we want to raise our son. And we left. And we had a conversation with the pastor at that former church. And like I said, he, was supportive of me as a person, but, maintained his faith. But we left, we made that decision. And I have seen sort of the impact of that on that community as well. I've actually been invited back to preach. And I've been invited back for some of the, the special days. So, Women's Day or, Youth Day, and things like that. And I recognized, at the time, I didn't think it was a statement, so to speak, but it was. And so every, decision that we make, that I make, models what I believe, even to the extent of, at my current church, we talk a lot about social justice, and we talk about African-American history and being part of a community. But last summer, after George Floyd was murdered, our kids were like, we are in the West suburbs, very white areas, and a handful of Black kids. What do we do with this? And how do we become advocates? And how can we use our voices? And so we let the kids guide us. We did a protest from our church to the police station, and let the kids lead it. And we stood behind them and made our voices heard. And so, that's another example. Same thing with, embracing the LGBTQ community. My cousin, my husband's cousin, but she's my cousin, is getting married this weekend. And I'm officiating, and she's marrying a woman, and I support that. And so that's hard, even within our families, because, her mother's not attending the wedding. There are other members of the family who are not, but there are things that, to me might seem small, but then when I think about them in the broader scope of life, make an impact and make a difference. And so every time I can try to do one of those things, I try to make sure that I'm living my truth, and that every setting that I'm in, people wouldn't question which TiShaunda you're gonna get. Yeah.
What books are you reading?
What books am I reading? Oh, that would be great if I had time to read outside. No, actually, so I just bought, and I think I just took it out of my bag too. It's Critical Race Theory. It's a compilation of essays that form the whole sort of movement. So I just bought that because I've read some of it, but I want to go back as we're launching this program, and it's like, this big. So that's sort of the top of my to-do list. There's a book that I heard on NPR, and I'm blanking on the name. I'm sure I have it in my Amazon list, but it's about a little boy who was raised in Louisiana, and he and his family are Muslim, and it's sort of his coming of age story. So I just got that. That'll be sort of my fun reading. And then one of the great things that we do in the Office of Equity is we do a book series. And so each member of the team chooses, what that topic is or what that book will be. We do it like quarterly, and then we have conversations monthly or bi-weekly about the book. So the one we just finished was Disability Visibility. And it was great. It's also a collection of essays, but it talks about the intersection of disability and other marginalized identities and how that shows up. It was really great. I learned a lot. The next one that's on our list is called CAST. So that'll be the next one that we,
Thank you.
yeah.
I know we do have at least one question from our online
We do.
participants.
Yeah, so question from Zoom. Are reparations a part of the conversation at NU? And is that a part of the restorative justice program while we're watching?
Wonderful question. I will be honest and say reparations sort of in the traditional sense of what reparations has previously been, hasn't been brought up as part of the conversation. But the restorative justice program that the Office of Equity is launching is both proactive and responsive. So the proactive piece is building community and addressing concerns that members of the community have had. And the responsive portion of it is responding to specific harms that have occurred on campus. I say that reparations hasn't been a specific portion of the conversation, but I do see sort of the thread that has been in the work that we've been doing since I've been here over the last year. So that's all I can speak to. But last summer, the university came out with 10 social justice commitments, and several of those commitments focused on repairing harm done to members of the community and elevating the voice and the presence of some in the community. So for example, we have just completed the renovation of the Black House. And that is, I right before I came here, I got to have a sneak preview and it brought me to tears. We'll have the ribbon cutting next month. But that, I won't say it's the traditional form of reparations, but I would consider that as part of our global look at how do we repair harm and give back to communities that have been harmed by institutional racism.
I'll come back to see if there are other questions here. Let me explore an idea with you. I spent 3 years as a commissioner on Evanston's Equity and Empowerment Commission, helping the city of Evanston to bring an equity lens to the work at the city level and the services. And I found myself often making a connection between, and this may be a stretch, so try it on or not, between some of the spiritual traditions of the examen, of rhythms of a person examining themselves and asking, where in my life am I aligned with God's will, God's ways, God's wisdom? Where am I unaligned? And those basic questions through journaling, through contemplative practices, a whole variety of exercises that our spiritual traditions have given to help persons do that kind of consistent examine. When I think about the work of an equity office or a commission at a city or a team at a church who's trying to bring an equity lens, an equity framework to bear upon a corporate body, an institution, to examine, maybe not using the theological language, but where is this corporate body aligned with the ways of equity, of justice, of fairness, of mutuality? Where is this corporate body unaligned, right? Does that work? What do you make of it?
It does, and I'm smiling because you've sort of released my secret. And so that is the central thread in almost every conversation that I have. And in particular with this anti-racism training that's coming out. So the senior leaders at Northwestern went through a training last fall that I wasn't there for the planning of it, but as soon as I started, I was like, absolutely, I'll jump in on it. And we heard from the community that it wasn't, it was sort of elementary.
Okay.
And it was sort of, a very high level look at what DEI is, what social justice is. And so I used that as an opportunity to say, hey, I have an idea. Let me see what else we can do with this. And so as we were looking for consultants to help us do this work, that was the critical piece for me.
Yeah.
How it's not just teaching, but how do we get folks to do individual work even while they're part of a collective?
Yeah.
And so the series that is launching, the first, there are 3 sessions, 3-hour sessions. The first session is very intentional about bringing that up. The second touches on it, but the third is really the culmination of where am I in this, line of justice? Where am I not aligned with the university's stated values? Yeah. And what do I need to do to bridge that gap?
And that I may be very high up or not.
Yeah. And that's what's so exciting about this program that we're launching, because this fall's program, we call it the Next 250. So it's those leaders who report up to sort of the executive team. There are about 50 of us. And, I use the feedback from the community, but also because I am who I am and I will continue to push for change, now have gotten those 50 leaders to agree to take that program too. And so we're launching that in February for Black History Month. And so we've started the process, and out of that, original training, there were, each of us got sort of a tailored summary of our work. But again, to me, it wasn't deep enough. We needed to do more. So this training, I'm calling it a transformative experience. We will break into cohorts of 25 and do that intentional work. And again, the team that I'm working with, we're building out very specific sort of continuing education that would be for the executive team as well as the other leaders, so that there's not we've checked it off the list, we've done some, self-examination once,
right,
but we'll continue in this process.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But
Yeah,
of course, I don't, when that's why I laughed and I said, you've let my secret out. In some ways, I, communicate that to the senior leaders and the other leaders on campus. But in some ways, I let it happen and just talk about the program broadly. And so it's, you have to be very sort of intentional about when and where and how you bring up certain conversations so that you can maximize the opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, if we think about the conversion out of white supremacy and the systems and the institutional structures and the cultural norms and the micros and the macros, one model of conversion being, oh, I had my eyes opened up and now I'm changed. Another deeper understanding of conversion is this is a lifelong process. This is a process, not just a moment. And the wisdom of exercises, trainings, practices, accountability, follow through, continuation, not just the one time. So how to bring deep examine and practices of conversion toward racial justice, queer liberation, feminist equity, justice for the earth, for our
Yeah.
indigenous communities. I mean, that's not going to just happen because we've been made aware. It's going to happen because we are being formed.
Yeah.
And so offices like yours are providing it spiritual exercises. You know, you're giving that opportunity to be changed. As one way of thinking about it.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I definitely draw on, you know, a lot of my, you know, learning in seminary. And so thinking about, is it Mark Foster's book? It's Foster, but it may not be Mark.
Right.
It's the spiritual disciplines.
Richard Foster.
Richard Foster, that's right.
Yeah.
And I have my, you know, bookshelf in my home office, and every once in a while, something that I'm trying to accomplish isn't happening. And, you know, Holy Spirit will remind me of something, and I'm like, oh, let me go look at that chapter. And so it absolutely influences how I talk to people, how I advocate for change, and how I communicate the reasons why. Yeah, and some of the methods that I use too.
Yeah. I've heard you. Yeah, Katie, please.
Yeah, I got a question. So here at Garrett, I work with a lot of students who are discerning a call to ordination and discerning a call to this work primarily in non-spaces. So two parts to the question. First is, as someone who is working in that kind of environment, say a little bit about why you still felt it was important to be ordained. And then related to that, a little bit about how you discern when to use and when not to use the title of reverend
Yeah.
in the spaces in which you work.
Yeah, no, great question. So the first is, I'm going to do the second one first. How do I discern when to use the title reverend and when not to? And say the first one again.
Yeah, why you still felt it was important for you to be ordained.
Yep. And why I still felt it was important to be ordained. So actually, I will answer your first question first. So my ordination process I think it was more deeply personal for me. And anybody who knows me will have heard me say, my MDiv was for me. All of my other degrees were, you know, for my career, for my family, or for my community, but this one was for me. And I know that it's broader than me, but it was deeply personal to me. And so while I ran and tried not to pursue an ordination track, and again, I laugh, God has jokes, because if you all had this degree at the time, I might have gone that way and not with the MDiv.
I hear that.
Yeah.
I hear that. Yeah.
Because I don't see myself as sort of the traditional minister in a church. But in one of my conversations with the Lord, when I was questioning why me, I remember the moment, and the Lord said to me, because you made yourself available, one, and two, it is because of who you are that I have you in this place. And so that is part of the reason why I felt it important to still go through the ordination process. I also look at truly every aspect of my life as being more than about me. So I think about who I represent to a child being in the pulpit, who's coming to church, or when I wear my collar when we did the protest. And even though I love preaching and I love teaching, sometimes it's about what and who I represent having that ordination. But then I bring it back to me. I needed that to be able to walk into the career path that I have now. And it was to sort of, I won't say erase because that's part of my history, but to understand those who have a different faith perspective about women in ministry, and to be in solidarity with that, and to say that I am walking with God on this, and I am not adhering to what man tells me I can and can't do. So that's the ordination piece. Reverend, it really depends. And most of the time, I use the title in spaces where I feel like I need to command authority. So in places where I'm either seen as not worthy of being called reverend, where they will look at me as a young-ish Black woman, and I need to command a certain authority, then I put all the degrees on there. And that's really it. But in most spaces, I don't. But it's beautiful and it's funny because, like, there are students at on Northwestern's campus who like searched me out and found out that I was a minister and will call me Reverend T. And I absolutely answer to that. There are some who, I'm not much for titles, so I, embrace and I, allow folks to call me by my first name, except when I'm in certain spaces where I'm like, okay, I need you, CEO of whoever, to call me Mrs. McPherson.
Yeah.
But when I'm doing work, when I'm doing, ministry, I'm TiShaunda most of the time.
Yeah. Final check on questions.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If that's okay. Yeah.
Is that Dr. Lund?
Sounded like
Yeah, I was gonna say it sounds good.
First, I want to express gratitude to you. I'm a Northwestern alum. I started my first classes almost 20 years ago, and I'm grateful for you.
Thank you.
I have a lot more to say about that, but thank you. And my question is, you are in a lot of roles, and you sound very busy, and often receiving news and stories that are of crisis, discrimination, a lot of pain and hurt. I'm wondering what you do to restore yourself,
Yeah.
And what you do to rest and relax and find, I wouldn't say find enjoyment. You find enjoyment in court,
Yeah.
but what do you do to seek out restoration and rest?
That is the $1 million question, the self-care restoration. This is something I absolutely struggle with. But I am grateful that I have such a strong support community that will remind me that I need to take a break or force me to. So what I'm working on right now is carving out. So I try as much as I can to keep my Fridays free from meetings. And so that helps me to think sort of big picture, allows me to, read. And even though it's for sort of the work, it's also personal enjoyment. So I try to do that. I have been imperfect with, carving out other sort of intentional time. But I love my team. My team will, tell me you need to take a day off. And I'm like, you work for me. What do you mean? But they are great at making sure that I'm taken care of. My husband and my boys every Friday. And this is one of the things that I have loved and appreciated about COVID. Friday is family night. There's nothing that interferes with family night And to have, you know, a 9-year-old looking forward to that, I think we might have him for a little while longer because of that.
Not gonna last long.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I'm surprised that we got it at 9 still, but he's still asking for it. And so Friday night, no matter, you know, how long of a week I've had, that is, you know, the one thing that I absolutely look forward to. We play board games, like things that, you know, this sort of generation of kids didn't really, you know, do before COVID. We have fun, and we pick movies, we rotate. So my husband and I will pick movies that we grew up with and the kids will watch. So that is definitely life-giving to me. And then every once in a while, I just need to take a trip. And that has been so hard with COVID. But this summer I was able to do that. And again, I'm grateful for the community I have. I have 2 good friends from law school. I graduated from Northwestern Law, who called me and said, next week we're going on vacation. And I was like, yeah, I remember we were talking about this, but I'm not going to be able to go. We planned a vacation with the kids. We get back on Monday. You all are trying to leave on Tuesday. I'm not. And they were like, we already bought your ticket. Mike told us it was fine. And so I, you know, got back and unpacked and repacked and went and just laid on the beach with 2 of my closest friends. And so where I don't do a good job of it, I have others to hold me up to help me do it. So, yeah.
Well, Reverend T, Senior Associate Vice President TiShaunda, this has been incredibly rich. You've shared enormous amount of wisdom, practical set of recommendations for all of us. And for all of us at Garrett-Evangelical, we are honored that you are a graduate of this school, and you do us right by the incredible work you're doing here at Northwestern and beyond.
Thank you.
Thank you for who you are, and thank you so much for your time with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you all for inviting me. And this is really the highlight of the work that I do, is being able to share and just be in community with you all. So thank you.
Thank you all for connecting online.